Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is Gabriel Correjo at Automation Anywhere, coming back with another LinkedIn audio event. And today we've got an exciting topic. Once again, we're talking generative AI, but I've got two special guests who are here to help us noodle through how we think about work. How is generative AI changing how we think about work? So an exciting conversation. Can't wait to dive into this. First and foremost, let me introduce my friend and colleague here at Automation Anywhere, Mr. Ben Yerushalmi, who is our SVP of Global Alliances and Channels for our award-winning program here at Automation Anywhere. And Ben, you travel the world, work with the world's biggest GSIs and partners. It's got to be on the minds of everybody, yeah?
Oh, 100%. We're seeing a ton of interest from our partners, from our partners' customers, and it's the conversation that everybody eventually has in every meeting I've been having, right? And our partners are starting to think a lot about how they can apply it in real life customer use cases, right? So when you think about it, the real magic of generative AI kind of happens when you combine it with action. So i.e. automation, and those are the people I'm talking to. And that's where we're seeing a lot of our partners heading, right? So think about it in the general context of CRM, for example, right? You can easily see the implications for sales, service, marketing. So for example, using ChatGPT to extract key information from a past customer conversation, generate personalized follow-up messages to that customer. You got to capture all the data that's required, generate multiple chats for ChatGPT or any generative AI platform, and then send that message off to the customer using automation, right? So the things like that just sort of like jump right out, and that's where a lot of our partners are really heading in the near term.
That seems to be a common, I'm generalizing a little bit about what you were mentioning, but it seems to be, I've seen a lot of examples. We've got a great developer network, obviously, in community. A lot of the examples we've been seeing recently that they've been developing the automations using generative AI have to do with sentiment analysis and customer service and being able to sort of call and respond based on queries from the customer base or customer. I think that's really interesting, but I think obviously there's so much more, and I'm really looking forward to exploring more with our other special guest. Ben, who we got today?
All right, so yes, today we should bring Ted Shelton onto the program. So Ted's an expert partner at Bain Company, where he's a member of their vector digital transformation practice and helps clients leverage intelligent automation, advanced analytics, and machine learning. So Ted advises some of the top companies in the world on the impact of artificial intelligence and intelligent automation on their business processes, and especially their workforce. So Ted, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
But Ted, look, before we get into sort of the disruptive impacts of generative AI on kind of everything we're doing today, you and I both live in Northern California and have been dealing with our own set of disruptive activities in the form of atmospheric rivers and cyclone bombs and things that I didn't even know existed, much like ChatGPT, up until very recently. So as an avid skier, what are the impacts that you're seeing of that?
Well, you've hit Ben on my favorite topic, with AI being my second favorite topic. And actually, I think in some sense, the amazing storms that we have had in Northern California are a great metaphor for the transformation that we're seeing in the world around AI. The snow just keeps piling up. It just keeps getting higher and higher. It's now over the second story windows of my building. Actually, my building now just looks like a lump of snow. It's not a building anymore.
A bunch of really big igloos out there, and
yeah, or you might just think that the village is gone. And I think my favorite ski resort, Kirkwood, is known for pretty extreme skiing. Terrific cliffs to jump off of, and so you get these places where you can drop in and then have this narrow chute between rocks that you ski through. Well, that's in a normal year. This year, it's a roll in off the top, and it's a highway with no rocks left. It's like everything's turned into a green run.
So I can finally ski it then, is what you're saying.
Come on up. Yeah. Well, we just extended the season till the middle of May, so you got lots of time.
It's also sorry for those of folks that don't live in Northern California and aren't familiar, but Kirkwood is by far one of the best mountains, definitely on the West Coast, and my favorite as well. And I invite all of you up to the Sierras to enjoy the splendor of the area where I actually grew up. So little personal note there, but I like the metaphor actually of this extreme weather system that's been happening, not just in California but across the globe. We have these. We went from crazy heat to now atmospheric rivers, as Ben mentioned. But, I'm struck by this generative AI conversation. And, we know the data about, ChatGPT being downloaded or new accounts created in record time, faster than any of the, latest social media platforms, et cetera. All of a sudden, it just happened. And Ted, you're not a Johnny come lately. You've been working with AI for quite a while. What do you sort of ascribe the passion and fervor around generative AI in particular over the recent months?
Well, I think what happened is, and by the way, I think there's this great interaction of one of the senior execs from OpenAI talking about this. We did you know it was going to take off as fast as it did? And he's like, "Are you crazy? We never would have launched it in November after Thanksgiving if we'd known how quickly it was going to grow. It ruined all of our holidays." Right? Imagine launching a major product between Thanksgiving and New Year's. Like, why would you do that? But I think two things happened. One was the interface of how you interacted with the product, right? So earlier with ChatGPT 3, which was released in 2020, and you had to go into more of a programming environment, or a programmer-friendly environment, I guess I should say, what they call a playground, to be able to interact with it. And so ChatGPT was just suddenly like the Google search field. It's like, hey, it's a super easy interface to interact with. But there is another thing as well, which is that they did a lot of work to train GPT, what they call GPT 3.5, to be more conversational. And so there's this notion in Hollywood of what they call the uncanny valley, where I can have a cartoon, and I can sort of suspend disbelief as a viewer and sort of see these rough drawings of figures moving around and accept that they're not really human, but enjoy it. And then I can have a movie and I can have a film of like real actors, and I recognize that they are real humans and I'm comfortable. But there's somewhere in between where it's not quite right. And so it becomes really sort of eerie and difficult to interact with, because it's like trying to be real, but it's not real. It's obvious that it's not real. And I think the earlier versions of GPT had a little bit of that problem of you would interact with it, but you're like, yeah, it's okay, but it's not real. And then 3.5 really just crossed that barrier. And suddenly we're interacting with it like we would with a person. And it's like, hey, wait, this is kind of like actually having a conversation that I can expect to have with a person. There are those moments still where it's like a little eerie, but it definitely crossed that threshold.
Yeah, I agree with that. As a non-technological person, even though I work for the world's greatest intelligent automation software company, and I love it. I was struck by the fact that I was like, oh, I don't have to go code or sort of know how to write certain prompts. I can just talk like a normal person, like I would do every day, and get sort of real responses or some value out of it. Right, as to your point, some of the earlier. And I'm not just talking about OpenAI, but just other technologies, you're like, oh, this is super user-friendly. But really, the results aren't the greatest anyway. So it does feel kind of hacky, right? But speaking of ChatGPT, Bain recently announced a partnership with OpenAI. And as well, you have a partnership with us, of course. So tell us a little bit about integrations and what you're talking to your customer base and who you're advising. What are you hearing? What are you hearing from those that you're talking to around the combination of the intelligent automation platform and generative AI and open AI?
Well, first of all, let me say, I am so excited because for the first time in my professional career, I'm having conversations with business people, business executives, so non-IT executives, about a technology in which the executives are expressing genuine intellectual interest in how does this technology work and what is it going to do for my company and do I need to worry about my job?
Yeah.
So and real sea change, because I think we've been talking to companies about automation. I've been working with Automation Anywhere for 10 years now, and it's hard to get executive engagement, even though it's such an important transformative technology. And so you have this real engagement now where generative AI, like you described for yourself in interacting with it, suddenly it's very relatable technology and people are able to comprehend the kind of impact it can have in their business. But I think the challenge is that they don't understand how it works. And there's a tendency to sort of say, oh, it's like this Harry Potter magic wand that I can wave and, all these problems I have in my business go away. And so the important conversation we're having is to explain the difference between deterministic and probabilistic automation. So first of all, let me just sort of reframe how we think about automation. Automation is any time we take work that a human would have done and do it with a machine. And so I can apply that to a harvester in a field. That's agricultural automation. Both OpenAI and Automation Anywhere are forms of automation. They are forms of taking work out of people's hands and having a machine do that work. The difference is one is deterministic and one is probabilistic. And what I mean by probabilistic is generative AI is going to take a data set. And by the way, that data set could be fine-tuned with your company's information. But it's going to take that data set, and when you ask it a question, it's going to predict what the right answer would be. And so if it's a common piece of information, like I say, what are the hours that your bank branch in my neighborhood are open? And then it might look at something about the chat history that it's had with you to try to say, well, what bank branch could you possibly be talking about? Or it can look at sort of general bank branch hours, and it could say, generally, our banks are open from this hour to this, right? So probabilistically, it'll give you an answer. But then if you say, what is my current balance in my savings account? Well, you do not want a probabilistic answer to that question. You don't want generative AI to be guessing. You actually want a real answer. You want a deterministic answer. You want to say, okay, well, let me actually take this particular customer and look at their particular bank record and look at their particular savings account. And you may want a logic tree to say, well, you have 3 savings accounts, sir. Which of these 3 were you asking about, right? And so you need deterministic and probabilistic automation to work together to really solve the different kinds of interactions that we're going to have, whether it's with employees or with customers. Okay, that's a long gap. Are you still there? Hello?
Sorry, guys. Am I there?
You're there now. Yeah, I hear you.
Sorry about that. I think that's a really interesting elevation of understanding sort of the different tools. And then once you understand what the tools do, then combining those to, as a force multiplier, for instance, right?
Yeah. I think the way we need to think about work across the enterprise is that we need to engage in a process of redefining what work we want people to do. So the starting point is to say, what should humans do? Humans should be creative, critical thinkers that are involved in interpersonal relationships. And so if you take sort of those 3 things as the sort of core bedrock, this is what humans do, then you should say, can I have automation do everything else? Whether it's the probabilistic or the deterministic, or really the combination of those things. That becomes the force multiplier. The force multiplier is, let me take all of this other stuff that we do, which honestly is not the best value that humans can add, and redesign work so that that is all done by these machines. And we at Bain, we call this the augmented workforce. So you have your workforce that is increasingly over the next decade going to be freed up to spend their time doing those critical thinking, creative, and interpersonal relationship tasks, and supported by these probabilistic and deterministic systems that can take over all the rules and all of the rote work, and even predictive work, and also feeding information. So when I do critical thinking, I want information. When I am creative, I want support in exploring the creative ideas. When I'm doing interpersonal relationship discussions with customers or clients, I want the support of an information system, right? So it's not as if I'm saying those 3 tasks that humans do are somehow without machines. Everything we do is going to be supported by these deterministic and probabilistic systems.
Yeah,
so
I think
speaking
it's sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Oh, go ahead, Gabe. You can finish the question.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's to your point, this idea of being able to stand on the shoulders of the technology so we can elevate ourselves as from the human perspective, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So speaking of technology struggles, I somehow got logged out, but I'm back. Anyway,
welcome back, Ben.
Hey, so Ted, you had written an article or a blog post called "Mr. Robot Goes to Washington," kind of spoofing the old Jimmy Stewart movie, and I thought it was particularly timely. As yesterday we had the CEO of TikTok in front of Congress, and I thought it was pretty clear that a lot of the regulators who we are expecting to help regulate technology weren't very familiar with it. And so as we sort of head into sort of a lot of uncharted waters where there's a lot of fear and uncertainty around certain technology, how do you think we're going to stay in front of some of the ethical questions that are involved and a lot of the business implications that are going to come with that when we've got a lot of these decisions sort of in the hands of people that are far, far less familiar with it?
Well, as a starting point, I think as business people, we cannot rely upon government to tell us what is and is not acceptable use in our businesses. At Bain, we talk about the concept of stakeholder capitalism as distinguished from shareholder capitalism. And we think that businesses should have a strong moral compass, and that it is ultimately good for business to take into consideration the impacts of their decisions, not just on increasing the wealth of their shareholders, but also on increasing the success and satisfaction of their employees, their customers, the communities they serve, and the planet as a whole. And so I think as businesses, we shouldn't be sitting around and waiting for government to say, hey, this is what's safe, this is what you can and shall not do. But to the specific point around where we are with government, you're absolutely right. I think there's still many government elected representatives who don't understand the internet, much less TikTok or artificial intelligence. And so I do think as business people, we should also be concerned about regulatory initiatives that are misguided. And so I think we, as business people, should also take that moral compass that I described and go to our elected officials and lobby government for the right kind of regulatory environment that is going to both promote innovation, but also, create the right kind of level playing field that ultimately is good for employees, customers, the communities we serve, and the planet.
Yeah, great. So thinking about it sort of in the context of the rules that govern us, I used to be, probably still am, a massive sci-fi geek, and I read everything Asimov ever wrote, including all of the iRobot series, not the ones with Will Smith, and there were the laws of robotics. There were 3, and then there was the 0th law at one point. But it was designed to govern, robotic behavior in its interactions with humans. And without going down sort of the ethical and political potential implications here, there's an instance of generative AI actually tricking a human into providing the response, the accurate response to a CAPTCHA prompt, which is basically a Turing test to determine whether something is human or a machine. And so, are we going to need to build into the tech some level of governing rules or laws that try to prevent that sort of behavior and sort of draw a line at things that could potentially be harmful, from a hacking perspective or otherwise?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the instance you're referring to was actually a part of the research work that OpenAI conducted on GPT-4 before releasing it. They have a group they call the Alignment Research Center. And the whole purpose of that group is to try to conduct exploratory investigations of this technology to determine if there are sort of unanticipated behaviors, emergent behaviors that are occurring given the growing size and complexity of these models. Because they are getting to the point where we don't understand all of what they are capable of doing or why they are capable of doing those things. And the basic concept in AI of alignment is to say, will these systems continue to do things in a way that is best for humanity, aligned with humanity? And that was sort of the concept I wrote in the Asimov stories as well, is, let's create the set of laws, including the zeroth law, that align these robots to the best outcomes for individual humans, and then as the zeroth law sort of outlined humanity as a whole. And it's a great idea. And I will say, I think there's some really interesting work being done in this field, including a paper written by a research team at Anthropic, which is one of the OpenAI competitors. And yes, there are a bunch of OpenAI. I know we all hear about OpenAI all the time, but there's actually a bunch of other companies out there doing work in the space too. And the Anthropic concept is called constitutional AI. And so rather than 3 laws or 4 laws, right, they're saying, let's write an entire constitution. Let's tell the AI, here are the things that you need to operate within in order to be a good citizen. And the last time I met with them, we were talking about this, and I said, well, if I take as a lesson our own experience as a nation with a constitution, like we have a constitution, and it's an amazing document, but it is still subject to interpretation. We debate these interpretations, and it is also subject to the intent and agendas of individuals who want to amend it, right? We have all these amendments. And so I think there's a really hard problem here, which is not about the machines, which is about how do we align humanity with humanity? How do you and I agree on what alignment looks like? And if we can't agree, or if we as a society and we as a species can't agree, it's going to be very hard for us to teach our machines how to agree.
So that'll be Ted.
Yeah,
that'll be part 2, which will be in all-day fireside chat. Ben has generously offered to buy everyone beverages, and we can explore humanity.
Excellent, Ben. Yeah, I look forward to that.
So let's reel it back.
221 people here who all want a beer as well.
Absolutely. Well, and I've got 121 beers in the fridge, so I think we're good.
I think it's worth. It is an important topic, and it's this is the title of our session, right? Is changing how we think about work, and there's many components to not just the technology, but that thought process of applying the technology, right? And real quick, Ben, I just want to remind the audience as well. Feel free to comment and ask questions. We're monitoring the feed, so if you have questions that you'd like to get answered here live with our experts on the event, throw those in the chat, and potentially we can bring you into the conversation as well. So sorry, Ben, didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh no, I wanted to sort of bring it back around to some of the business implications. There's been a lot of talk about kids, in the educational field, right? Kids using ChatGPT or other generative AI to sort of help or augment their work, the things that they write. but there are also massive business implications, obviously. But when you start to think about it by industry, are there, say, the top 3 industries that you would think are going to benefit the most from generative AI?
Well, I think the first place I would start would be the work that we do every day, sort of common business activities, and that is industry agnostic. You can say that some industries have a higher proportion of people that are doing physical work, but I do think that, and if folks haven't been paying attention to the development of autonomous robotics, start paying attention. that's going to be the next snowstorm or atmospheric river that hits us all. Because generative AI, by the way, makes it a lot easier to allow robots to navigate in their environments. And if you've watched any of the Boston Dynamics videos, the mechanical capabilities of robots are there. We just haven't figured out how to have them navigate human environments. So I think the first observation is we're all going to be increasingly doing information work, because the physical work is going to be supplanted by physical robotics. And so then within that information sphere, there are a whole set of very common business tasks that we all engage in: writing emails, writing proposals, writing reports. And virtually every single one of those things is going to be impacted by these generative AI tools. There's actually a really good study released March 2nd by 2 MIT professors, in which they took a 450-person study group, and with the proper research design, control group, et cetera. They looked closely at a set of common business activities, and they tested two dimensions. One is the amount of time it takes to complete those tasks, and the other is the quality of those tasks, with an outside group of reviewers reviewing the outputs of these participants. And they determined that, so on average, the participants took 27 minutes to complete a given task without generative AI. And using ChatGPT, they were able to do, on average, the same tasks in 17 minutes. So a 10-minute reduction, 10 minutes out of 30 minutes, effectively, a third, actually better than a third time improvement. But what was also really interesting is the quality improvement, so that doing those tasks with ChatGPT actually resulted in a substantially higher quality. And then the third thing that was really interesting was the compression of the results of the best performers and the worst performers in that quality and time dimension. And so what it did is it actually, so if you take sort of the unaided person and the aided person, you end up with the worst performers in time and quality actually getting much closer to the best performers in time and quality. And so I think the expectation has to be that in the workforce, every single thing that we do on a daily basis, we're going to be doing with generative AI. And of course, Microsoft and Google and everybody else is embedding all this technology in all the tools we use. So we're gonna have them right there. And the key is to teach people how, coming back to your comment about the educational environment, the key is to teach people how to use these things appropriately. Because I think the understanding that they are probabilistic, not deterministic, means that we need to understand that they need oversight, right? We need to fact check. We need to review, improve. And so that's sort of the first dimension, is like everything we do in business. And then sort of the second thing that I would observe is that there are specific functions in business where we're going to radically change the processes and the workflows because of generative AI. Ground zero is marketing. And I think, Jasper.ai, for those that aren't aware of it, and you should go take a look at it, whether you care about marketing or not, I think it's a really interesting example of how to take marketing workflows and build an application around that marketing workflow that gives people an ability to be augmented by these generative AI technologies. And so you go and say, hey, I'm going to go and create a Amazon product listing. So there's a button there, click, I want to create an Amazon product listing. And then they have the whole workflow and the content types and a form to fill out, so that the human can do their part, and then the machine can do its part to be able to ideate, improve, review, approve, and send off to Amazon the output of that content. So that's the sort of second thing. It's like every business which has these common functions is going to be transformed. So then finally, I'll get to your question, which is the third point, which is, well, within specific industries, are there specific things that companies do that are going to be important? And I think any organization that does product development, creates documentation for their products, whether it's testing plans or it's usability guidelines or it's instruction manuals, service, any organization that does service, customer service is going to be, massively changed and impacted. So it starts being hard to say that one industry will have more or less, because I really do think this is a general purpose technology that is going to change the way we think about all work.
I've got a question for both of you guys. As I mentioned at the top, you're both speaking with the world's biggest companies across the globe. Clearly, there's no shortage of ideas, but what's your short list? What are some of the coolest or most interesting use cases you've seen? Some of your favorites?
I'd point to a great article in Forbes about Morgan Stanley and what they're doing. So to give you a real world example of something that's public, which obviously we can't talk about a lot of the things that we're doing that aren't public, but it describes how they are enabling their wealth management advisors and you can sort of take that concept and apply it to any sort of advisory or any sort of customer support relationship. But how do you actually fine tune the model to make sure that every day it has the best possible information available, so that every single one of Morgan Stanley's wealth management advisors can get a call from a customer and answer that call and give the best advice possible. And then some of the additional things that sort of we think about is, well, now you've got that call coming in. Am I recording the call? Yes. Well, can I convert that call into a transcript that then I can apply ChatGPT to summarize and pull the main points of the conversation out and the follow-ups that are required, so that my wealth management professional then, as a second step, says, hey, here are the 5 things that in that call you had with your client that you need to follow up on. And then can it take the next step, which is help me draft the response, go pull the information, put together the email, put together whatever the PowerPoint, whatever it is, right, that requires response. So that transformation of how an advisor works with a customer in any context, I think is an amazing, that to me is so so much of a change in the way we work.
I think that's interesting too, right? Because I think also fundamentally what that does is provide a better human-to-human experience leveraging the technology, and that's the end goal. Kind of to your point earlier about just this concept of empowering, which is a conversation we've been having around intelligent automation and what we do. Anyway, freeing people up from the mundane. In this case, we're leveraging both the power of automation and generative AI. To get even better answers, not just to offload a mundane, repetitive process.
Yeah, one of the things that I've seen, which was actually kind of interesting, and I wasn't even thinking about it like this, but in the context of the ad business, right, the agency business, where I've got a couple of stories here, but I was actually at a automation conference last week that one of our partners was running, and I was talking to somebody who's an executive in one of the agencies. And they have a lot of people who are, and this is massively disruptive, who write copy, right? And that's their bread and butter. And you could see something like ChatGPT completely disrupting that, taking humans out of that almost completely. And I was talking to the executive, and he said, it's not that we're going to hire less people. We're going to hire people that do different things. So rather than having people who write the copy, you have to have people that know how to write the prompts, right? So it basically shifts one type of work to another type of work and changes the skill set required to do effectively the same thing, but at far greater rates of productivity. So you're starting to see use cases like that, just massively disruptive to entire industries. Sticking on the ad industry, I had been preparing to have a conversation with one of the CEOs of a major digital agency. And I was actually using Chat GPT to help me prepare. And I wanted to make sure that I had sort of exhausted all of the business metrics that we could potentially influence with automation. Things like, that are relevant to the ad industry, like ad to invoice and how you shorten day sales outstanding and things like that. And had this whole laundry list of things that I was ready to talk about. And I had used Chat GPT to get ready for this meeting. And so, I had the examples of things like writing copy and things like that. But when I started talking to this executive, I had all of this stuff that I had prepared using Chat GPT, and all he wanted to talk about was how generative AI was going to completely disrupt the agency business. And so I thought it was a really interesting juxtaposition. But that's where business leaders are going, right? They're really thinking about not just how do I, gain productivity, how do I disrupt an entire industry? And that's I think where this technology kind of leads us. And I know, Ted, you had recently attended the first ever generative AI conference. And so businesses are springing up around this technology. And so, you could see us, there's certainly the hype cycle, and then you see the bubble type of behavior. But how do you see established technology vendors competing against a lot of the new players in the space? Or do you see a lot of partnerships like we've seen with Microsoft and OpenAI? How do you see this playing out?
Yeah, it's interesting. At Bain, when we look at our clients and the kind of problems and questions that they bring to us, we tend to group them into two categories. We talk about folks that have a burning platform, which is to say there's an urgent problem that is an existential threat, which I have to respond to. And then there's this other category that we call burning ambition, which is a set of people that sort of are looking out into the future, they're looking ahead and saying, where do we want to navigate to and how do we get there faster? And so I think when we look at the set of startups out there, that's sort of the whole game in the startup world is people who have a burning ambition, right? They're going to go change the world. And the challenge if you're an established business is you can do one of two things. You can either say, hey, I am going to have that ability to sit on the front of the boat and look out ahead and worry about where we should be headed and drive us to have that burning ambition. Or you can sit in the back of the boat tending to the motor and not recognize that there's some startup looming right in front of your boat that you're about to run into until it's too late. And then suddenly you have a burning platform. And so I think the interesting conversation with companies today is, are you going to seize the day and have a burning ambition around this new technology? Or are you going to wait and let it become a burning platform, which it will become for everyone if you don't do something about it now? And by the way, it'll be a lot less pleasant to be on a burning platform than to have a burning ambition. And we can go and pick on particular companies, but there's certainly a fair spread in the market right now between those two camps.
I think that's really interesting. And I think, Ben, what you brought up as well with that conversation with the CEO is something that we first sort of talking about in depth. I mean, we talk about it all the time, but in depth at Imagine last year about this idea of the automation first mindset. And in this case, I think now with Gen AI and just a short period of time, it's the automation plus AI or AI plus automation mindset as a fundamental strategy to business. And it's not just, these aren't just sort of, we talked about use cases in even sectors or functions that can leverage the technologies, but I think, enterprise wide as a fabric of how you do business, I think there's an imperative there, right? So are you guys, is this what you're hearing? And then following up on that question, we're talking about how people are thinking about all these things. What, Ted, what does Bain together with Automation Anywhere, how are you advising? What are the sort of answers or how are we guiding customers?
A lot in those two questions. I think two sort of principles. The first is you can't put your head in the sand. You've got to start experimenting with these technologies. So you may not know exactly how they're going to work. You may not know precisely where the biggest impact is going to be. But waiting for it to become a burning platform is not is not a good idea, right? So it's hard, right? I mean, I think so. In one of our studies, we looked at the difference in stance and investment stance between companies that are truly the market leaders in growth and profitability in their segments versus the laggards. And actually, one of the really interesting things is the percentage of their resources that they allocate to transformation and to changing the business versus the percentage of that they allocate to run the business and keep it going the way it is. And so having that transformation, that change mindset is critical, and being able to invest in even in a difficult time. And many industries are feeling economic headwinds at the moment, and even in those times you have to invest. And I think sort of the second thing we talk about is pace, because this is not a slow moving change. It is not a 100-year process by which we will change business. It is it's actually a process that's accelerating. So you sort of look at the history of at least the recent history of AI. We can go back all the way, to Alan Turing, or we can go back further than that if you want. But if we just sort of look at since the 1990s, there was a period of pretty stable 20 years where we were focused on using increased computational capacity to apply complex algorithmic approaches to information. And then as computational capacity continued to increase and our facility in applying these algorithms and the amount of data we had available continued to increase, feedback learning loops started being adopted and being proven to be successful and able to improve the algorithms for particular purposes. And then it was really only and so that was maybe a stable period of about 10 years. So 20 years to 10 years. Now, in the last 5 years, we've had this emergence of these large language models and this concept of generative and also diffusion technologies. And so the pace of innovation is becoming faster and faster. We're really bad as human beings in thinking exponentially, and yet this is happening right in front of our eyes. This is an exponential change. And so in 2 years, things are going to be much more different than they were 5 years ago. And in 3 years, they'll be different again from those 2 years. And so the sort of second advice for business executives is this is not something where you are going to be able to be patient. This is a transformation that you have to embrace as happening in your lifetime. You can't say, oh, well, I'm going to be retired in 5 years. I don't have to worry about this. No, you have to worry about this now. It's happening now. And so then we can sort of dive into, well, where do you start? But without that framework, without that starting point of both, I need to experiment and I need to be urgent, we don't think you're going to get there.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I think too, with the combination of automation, right? So you're able to potentially put, you mentioned like sort of ship fast mentality, right? Or at least test. With the augmentation with intelligent automation, potentially also you're able to build in some guardrails because you've got a sort of defined process where you're not just sort of ad hocing, hey, GPT, give me this thing, and then you're posting it out to the world or something, right? So there's some controls potentially that are available. And we can go into a whole nother conversation about security and all that. And I think Ben brought up an interesting point too, about, and I had heard this when Mahir was at Davos and did his panel, this concept of prompt engineering, so they can get a good answer. So there's so much more we can talk about. But I do want to, again, extend the offer to our audience. We've got hundreds of people out there listening, and thank you for joining us. And Ted, thank you for sharing your insights and some really provocative concepts. But anybody out there that wants to comment, where we've got two experts here that are out there talking to the world's leaders in business. So invite you to let us know what you're thinking. Ben, are you with us? I know we're having. I apologize to the audience. we're having some technical issues with some of the audio here, but hopefully Ben's there. Ted, talk to me a little bit. So I think with this prompt engineering thing, I'm fascinated by this, by the way, but also you mentioned sort of the reskilling aspect for this new, and I think this is fundamental too, to how we think about work and the future of work, right? What kind of conversations are you having specifically around that, if you are, with the clients and customers you advise?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that I believe strongly that as users of this technology that we have to become good at. So prompt engineering, that sort of the first topic. There are uses of this technology which I would describe as you're not going to get the results that you want, and so you have to sort of learn. So for example, if I were to say, there's a 150-page report that Microsoft actually just released about sort of their experimentation with GPT-4 and sort of their conclusions. And so this example comes from that report. So if you were to say, why are most boats painted white? Then because this is a probabilistic technology, we'll try to take that question at face value and go out and search the relevant data sets for answers to boats being painted white and why that might happen. If you were to say, why are most boats painted pink? It'll still do the same thing. It'll try to find answers to answer the question about why are boats painted pink, right? And so using the technology in the right way, asking the question in the right way so that you're getting a response that's sort of relevant and fit for purpose is a critical skill to learn. Because you can certainly easily take it off the rails and abuse it. Just like we can abuse anything, right? I can go and do the same thing with Google. I can go cherry pick answers,
You're reminding me of conversations with my grandfather when I was young, right? Where I'd ask the wrong question, he would always say, "Ask the right question, get the right answer," and I'd end up with a lollipop or something.
Yeah, and so maybe not as good as your grandfather.
That's all about asking the right prompts too, right? As you think about how these skills change and sort of morph over time. One of the things that we're talking about at Automation Anywhere is generative automation, right? So one of the best things about generative AI is that you can build things faster with code, right? I watched a Chat GPT-4 demo basically build a bot, which was really interesting. So when you think about impacts in automation, it's going to be massive, right? Because now you could have an automation assistant basically available to anybody in the company, and they wouldn't have to learn the tool. They would just need to know what they want to do and not necessarily how to automate it, right? If they're familiar with the process, they can become an automation expert and really help drive business process improvement. And so I think, democratizing automation, goes well beyond what we've typically done with citizen development. And this really puts automation in a meaningful way in the hands of a lot more of the workforce. So that's actually really exciting. I don't know, Ted, if you're starting to see stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the if people haven't watched the video live, there was a live demo that was done. It's recorded. It's now on YouTube by one of the senior execs at OpenAI when they introduced GPT-4. It shows some pretty amazing capabilities of the model already today to generate programming code. And one of the examples, he draws a picture of a website, and he uploads that photo or a photo of that drawing into GPT-4 and asks GPT-4 to build a website with that functionality, and it can, right, without him writing a single line of code. And so I do think that we're going to continue to democratize. I mean, I started my career as a software developer. I worked as an executive in software development tools companies. The whole history of software development, from the first computer of where we flipped switches to program it to today, has been to make programming easier and easier, and to expand the number of people that are capable of programming, creating software. And this is just another exponential leap in the ability for people to create programs, and automation being a kind of program. And people who are close to the work should be the people who create the automations for that work. I think it's going to be incredibly transformative for the automation industry.
Yeah, we're really excited about it. So, Gabe, do we have questions from our audience?
Yeah, we've got a couple of folks that have been waiting patiently, and I appreciate that. So let's see if we can bring Mahendra in and see what's on his mind. Mahendra, are you there? Simon, our producer, is going to activate your mic and welcome you to the show. I feel like we need like some funny music and sound effects, like a radio show, like a morning radio show, you know?
It looks like Mahendra's been added, but is muted. Mahendra?
Well, folks, this is a live show, as you can tell. So, all right. Well, let's try one more. Aditya, are you there? Let's see. Simon, can we bring in Aditya?
Hello, Shelton.
Oh, there you are.
You're here. We hear you.
Yeah, we got you. You're on the show.
Yeah, nowadays we can see the ChatGPT, right?
I'm sorry?
Nowadays we can see the ChatGPT, right? As of now, I'm seeing like ChatGPT 4. What is the difference between ChatGPT and ChatGPT 4?
Good question.
Oh.
Happy to jump in and answer that. I think it's worth watching that video. If you go and Google, YouTube, OpenAI live demo ChatGPT 4, you can get actually a much more hour-long answer to that question. But the short answer is a larger training data set, an increase in what are called parameters, that is the number of connections between the tokens in that system to each other, which we've seen as we've moved from GPT version 1 to 2 to 3 to 3.5, which is what ChatGPT is based, the initial ChatGPT is based on, to now 4. What we've seen is that number of parameters, those connections between the tokens in the system, actually enables the system to perform better, to be able to answer questions more accurately, less toxicity, a faster and more complex response often, right? And I think the last thing is the training, right? And so they've been working on training GPT for a year. So it's not as if this is suddenly like, hey, we invent a new technology, let's release it. No, they've been working on developing and training that technology to do a better job and building in more mathematical skills, more reasoning skills into the way in which it handles questions. And so it's much more likely to give you the correct answer to a mathematical problem. One of the demos in that video that I recommended is looking at the US tax code and trying to understand how it applies to a particular situation, which GPT 3.5 would not have been capable of doing, but now 4.0 can. So worth taking a look at this. If you sign up for Plus, OpenAI Plus, you'll get access to GPT 4. I think we have another question in the waiting room.
Yeah, Manisha. Simon, can we bring in Manisha and get her question? Thanks for joining, Manisha.
Hear me? Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
We got you.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for this session. I think it's really insightful, and it's a late Friday night, but I really found this really interesting. So yeah, first of all, thanks to you guys for having this session, and thanks to Ted and Ben out here for sharing all those amazing insights. My quick question out here is, while you were speaking about, some of the examples, I was just Googling about, those things. So my question is, you spoke about, the discussion around using better prompts, and I have been using the ChatGPT since it was, launched, just to try and, as basic as improving my emails or, and I totally agree with you. The quality of the output depends on the quality of input what you give to ChatGPT. You have to be really precise and, really spell it out for ChatGPT. So my question out here is, if we're talking about disruption in the industry. So if I want to kind of upskill myself in this whole generative AI field to be better at my job, or maybe look at the more newer roles coming in. So what would be the place for me to look at? I mean, apart from just working on ChatGPT, what would be your advice?
Well, first of all, fantastic that you right away picked up this tool and started using it, because I definitely think experimenting, trying it out for yourself, looking at what happens, and learning from that experience is the foundation that everybody should be doing. Secondly, there is a growing library of books out there that people have written. And I can't recommend any one specific book, and you have to do your diligence yourself. But I would take a look at the authors that are out there that are writing, and make some good judgment calls on your own about which things are most applicable to you, because I think there's a growing set of people out there that are experimenting with what the field is calling prompt engineering. And trying to understand what works and why, and what doesn't work and why, and I think you can gain a lot from reading some of these books. And then third, there's a more random walk, to be sure, is looking out on the internet for all of the people that are writing on this topic. But I think, again, if you use some discerning filters on whose advice you take, I think there's an enormous amount that you can get out of people's blog posts and articles about their experiences. So there's no dearth of information to go and read. I do ideally think that companies are going to launch education programs, and ultimately education, our education system needs to launch these programs to teach engineering, prompt engineering, and also the other set of the skills that are necessary that I didn't mention earlier, which is, don't believe everything that it tells you. Fact check, look for opportunities to improve. It's not use ChatGPT to do my job for me. It is use ChatGPT to help me do my job better, which still means you have a job to do. So that would be the other advice, is just make sure you're always looking at that output and improving it and correcting it.
That's great advice, Ted. I want to, and thanks for the question. I think, potentially maybe we'll get your short list, Ted, of who you're reading, the bloggers, the authors, your friends in your network. That you've been doing this for a long time, so I'd love to know who your short list is as well, and we can maybe share it in the feed after the fact. We're going to take one more question. Again, I want to thank everybody for joining. We had a tremendous turnout. And so, Simon, if you could, can we bring George in? See what his question is.
Yeah, hey all, thank you very much. Really insightful session. Prompted a broader question. Ted, you had mentioned stakeholder capitalism. Ben, you mentioned Mihir's talk at Davos. Key to the fourth industrial revolution is the fusion of physical, digital, and biological. Does Automation Anywhere have any ambitions which include blending into domains outside of the digital?
Wow.
That's all you, Ben.
It's a stumper. You know what I could do, George? I mean, we are on conversations all the time. What we could do is have a conversation with our chief product officer and some of the folks in that organization and see where we're going with that, because I think that's really interesting. And I know you guys have some interesting announcements coming up as well. And I think that's definitely an area that we should be exploring together.
Well, and I guess the thing I would jump in and add is, if for folks that aren't aware, Google's published some really exciting research recently on how large language models can improve the operation of physical robotics. So I mentioned that earlier in this discussion, is that, hey, wake up. If you're not paying attention, the whole world of physical robotics is about to change. And of course, Google's also been at the forefront of research into how scientists can improve the way they investigate biological elements, right? So AlphaFold, and just a huge unlock for the way we're going to cure disease and and other things. So absolutely, the field, leaving aside, I'm not speaking for Automation Anywhere, but the field certainly is hugely applicable to physical and biological, not just information elements.
Yeah, and I think with our strategic partnership with Google as well, there's a number of exciting developments that are happening and coming soon. So stay tuned for that. So listen, we are at the top of the hour. I think this was meant to be like a half hour. We went over already, but couldn't stop the conversation because it's so, it's so exciting. And Ted, I really want to thank you for sharing your insights. Like we mentioned a few times, I think we could do this all day potentially. Ben said he's buying the beers, so free drinks for everybody. But
and I invite people to follow me on LinkedIn and read my regular newsletter. I cover topics like this, so hopefully we can continue.
Yeah,
the
and we'll put the
conversation.
link to your newsletter in the feed. And to your point, the beauty of this and the beauty of doing this on LinkedIn, for instance, is being able to interact one-to-one if we want to and reach out. And I know that you welcome that. So feel free to connect with Ted and Ben and myself. Let's do it again. But thanks again for the time, both to our audience. Ben, Ted, I know you guys are busy guys. I hope you have a great rest of your Friday, everybody. And we'll see you soon. So thanks so much.
Gabe.
Thanks, Gabe. Thanks everybody for joining.